Now let me show you a very useful thing to kind of understand this. If you go back and you look kind of close to the top of the math packet, let's see what page it's on. 11. It refers to the closing statement, which is, the settlement statement. Closing statement, settlement statement, closing disclosure, whatever you want to call it. And so it talks about debits and credits, and then it also goes in and it tells you what costs are common buyer single entry items, meaning they only affect the buyer, not the seller. And so that'd be loan amount, the earnest money, origination fee, discount points, appraisal fee, credit reports, right? It gives you this big list of things that are common single entry buyer items. Common seller single entry items, seller's loan payoff, the commissions, deed prep, excise taxes, a whole lot less there. And then your double entry items, sales contract price affects both. Real property taxes are going to affect both. Of course, we said due diligence fee affects both. Any HOA prorations. So I'm going to show you what the worst possible type of question could look like, but then I'm going to remind you that yours is going to be so much simpler. Okay? If you scroll down, by the way, I don't know that it necessarily makes you feel better, but I will tell you that they have gone soft over the years. Back in the day when I got my license, we had to do a full closing disclosure as part of the test. The state licensing exam, it was part of it. They got rid of it. So now you just have like smaller versions that you don't actually have to fill out in the actual format. We will do it in the real deal format whenever you get your license in post-licensing 302. But so this is what you would call a fact sheet. Okay, it's basically all the information that could be pulled from a contract, and we're going to use this information to figure out the credits and the debits for the buyer and the seller. Now, the good news is that while you can do it all simultaneously, you will only ever be answering the question about one party at a time. So, for example, before I even start looking through all the details, the question on this is right here. What is the total cash to close due from the buyer at closing? That means I don't need to worry about the sellers in any way, shape, and form. Everybody with me? I just have to calculate the buyer's credits and debits. And so I'm going to show you this. And you're not going to like it. But remember, as long as this takes me to do, it's still just one question on the test. It does not hold any more value than any other question on the test. Everybody with me? So let me show you how this kind of goes. Let me kind of zoom out here. I should be fine. Since we're looking at the buyer, I'm going to put over here buyer. And we're going to take a look at their credits and their debits. And I'll make mention of the seller as we go along, but I'm not going to fill out the sellers because we're not looking at the sellers for the sake of this test. Now, it works the same. So if you start looking at the information, June 12th for a property located in the city. Why is that important? June 12th is going to be used for prorations, and the fact that the property is located in the city tells me that if I have to calculate the tax bill, I'm going to be charging them county taxes and city taxes. So I'm going to come back to that 12th. Sales price of $87,500. So sales price affects the buyer and the seller, but we're only focusing on the buyer. And so what would be the sales price to the buyer? Is it a credit or is it a debit? There you go. It's a debit because they are paying that amount of money. So we're taking it from them. So 87 $7,500 purchase price. Due diligence. The parties agree to a 30-day due diligence period with a fee of $150. What did I just tell you? How does a due diligence fee appear on a closing disclosure? Yeah, it's a seller debit buyer credit, and obviously we're just looking at the buyer, so we're going to put it as a buyer credit here. If we were looking at the seller too, we would obviously put it on their side. So we're going to say $150 due diligence fee. Earnest money, what's that? There you go. It's going to be another buyer credit, right? Single entry buyer credit. Earnest money does not affect the seller because it's being held by an escrow agent. So $1,500 earnest money. Financing, 90% conventional loan. Let's stop there. That means we're going to have to calculate the loan amount. Loan to value ratios. We're going to take our loan or our purchase price of $87,500 and multiply it by our 90% loan to value ratio. So that gives us a loan amount of $78,750. Is that a buyer credit or a buyer debit? Think about it. It's a credit because the bank is giving you that money on the day of closing. Yes, you're going to have to pay it back later, just like a credit card, but still getting money today. So it is a credit to the buyer. The bank is paying that money on behalf of you. So it's going to be $78,750 loan amount for buyer credit. Now, we're going to need that number several times to fill this out completely because it says lender is charging 1% origination fee and 2 discount points. Well, remember, 1% origination fee means take your loan amount, multiply it by 1%. It's going to be a loan origination fee of $787.50. Is that a credit or a debit? There you go. Debit. So $787.50. Put LO for loan origination. And then 2 discount points. Well, folks, if 1% is this, I'm just going to multiply this by 2. That's the same as saying 2 discount points. Everybody see what I did there? It would be the same as taking the loan amount and just multiplying it by 2%, but I just made my life easier. So that's going to be a debit, right? For discount points, $1,575 discount points. Now here's where things get a little iffy. And I can't remember to what extent we've talked about this or not. But let me give you a quick miniature lesson on interim interest, folks. When you're dealing with loans, if you will, they are paid in arrears. And so if you're closing on June 12th, when is your first mortgage payment going to be?
August 1st.
August 1st. So you will make August 1st payment, and when you do, that pays for the month of July's interest. Then you got September's payment that pays for August interest. That's what we mean by it's paid in arrears. And so the banks are always going to get their interest and their monthly payments, except they're not going to be getting a payment in July, which means they want June's interest at closing. That is the interim interest. And remember, it's in the interim of your amortization schedule kicking in. And so the way that this works, folks, banks make money off of charging you interest. And so they say, we charged you interest, or we lent you the money June 12th. Start paying interest on June 12th. And so let me show you how you calculate this. You would take your, just like we were just doing with amortization math, you would take your principal balance, which is your $78,750. That's your loan amount. Okay, they can't charge you interest on money you didn't borrow. Then you're going to multiply it by your interest rate of 8%. But that's annual interest. And so what we really are looking for is days worth of interest. So you're going to divide this by 360 or 365, depending on which method we're using. This sheet is based on 360. And so this is how much interest the bank would want per day given the current balance. So that's your per diem for interest. And I'm just going to write this down. And so then you need to figure out the number of days that you owe the bank interest for. Folks, it is June 12th through the end of June. It's just, that's it. It does not leave that month because they'll get all their interest everywhere else and your normal monthly payments. Bree, I'm not sure I understand your question.
I'm confused. Why aren't they paying on July 1st?
Because amortization schedules are designed to be the exact same principal and interest payment each month. And you didn't own the house for the entire month in the month of June. And so if they were to make you pay a July payment, they're going to screw up your amortization schedule. And the banks don't like that. They would rather it be nice, clean, easy, where every principal and interest amount is the exact same. Yeah. So they just get it at it's basically prepaid interest. They say, okay, well, just pay us June's interest at closing, just so we don't mess up your amortization schedule. And buyers like it because they basically get to skip a payment, right? You close on a house, you spend all this money. It would suck to turn around and have to pay the payment immediately after closing. So they basically give you that month. So here's how you calculate the days, folks. It is literally June 12th through the end of June. And we're doing 30-day months on this worksheet. This whole worksheet's based on the 30 days. You could just start counting on the 12th, right? 12th, 13th, 14th, count all the way up to the 30th. But the easiest way to do it, folks, take the amount of days in the month, which every month has 30. We're doing the 360-day method. Subtract the date of closing, but then you have to add one back in. You're adding the one back in to include the day of closing. Because if you just say 30 minus 12, that's how many days are left after the 12th. But you have to include the 12th because the banks say you borrowed money on the 12th, start paying interest on the 12th. Does that make sense? So you owe them for 19 days of interest. And if you don't believe me, you can go 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 19 days. 19 days. So it's how many days in the month minus the date of closing plus 1. But you only do that plus 1 trick for interim interest. Nothing else. Don't you ever do it for tax prorations. It doesn't work the same. Because remember, for taxes, rents, and HOA dues, the seller owns the day of closing. But this is the buyer's interest. It has nothing to do with the seller. So 19 days times your $17.50 a day would be $332.50 in interim interest. And that is a loan cost. So that is going to be a debit. Craziest I, but whatever. Everybody still with me so far? Ish. I'll take that as a you're loving this. So next is homeowners insurance. First year's premium $350. That is literally just the bank's wrong answer. That is literally just the bank's the attorney taking a year of homeowners insurance so they can pay your first year up front. Right? So that's going to just be plug it in. No math there. $350 for your homeowners insurance premium. which is your first year. I wish it was only that much, but whatever. Real property taxes. The assessed value for real property taxes is $76,450. The city tax rate is 58 per 100. The county tax rate is 65 per 100. Taxes are unpaid and will be paid later in the year from the borrower's escrow account. So you can see where the math we taught you previously is now just a small inkling in this much larger math problem, because what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, it's in the city, so you need to charge them the county tax rate of 65 cents per 100, plus you need to charge them the city tax rate of 58 cents per 100 for a total of $1.23 per 100. Divided by 100 gives us a per dollar rate. Per dollar rate times our assessed value, $76,450. That means your annual, I'm just going to put over here, annual tax bill, $940.34. And then what it says is taxes are unpaid, which means the buyer will be paying them later in the year. So if the buyer is going to be paying the full tax bill later in the year, how do we make this fair? You got to be careful, folks. You got to give me the full answer, because that's what's going to be expected on the test. And so we are going to debit the seller, credit the buyer. We've got to take from the seller the portion they ate. Remember, I gave you that analogy of what did they eat? And so the seller is responsible for January 1 up through and including June 12th. And so you take your annual tax bill, divide it by 360, because we're doing the 360 method, for a per diem of $261 a day for taxes. And then remember, with the 30-day method, it's very easy, because it's just January, February, March, April, May, and 12 days in June. So you can basically say 5 months times 30 days, plus the 12 days for the month of June. Seller's responsible for 162 days, times your $2.61 a day. And so this would be a seller debit, buyer credit. So we're not really focusing on the seller, but we are going to put these tax prorations under the credits for the buyer, because this is how we make it fair. Because what's going to happen is the buyer will pay this full tax bill later in the year, but it's fair because the seller gave them their portion. I'll put this as tax prorations. Now let me pause, see if you have any questions about how we just calculated the tax prorations. Cheyenne, it's going to be okay. It's one question. Like, I could just hear Cheyenne saying "sweet baby Jesus" while she was like rubbing her face, right? She's just like... Yeah, there you go. I got to keep it PGs, that's the instructor. I can't use all the words. There you go, Raphael Pixie. Folks, it's still 1 point, right? This and the other math concept that I told you about. Answer everything else on the test, and if you have time, tackle it. But do not go to this one and waste 45 minutes on the test with it likely that you're not going to get it wrong. At the end of the day, it's still just one question. I'm a realist, okay? I understand that some of you will just take the L. Now, I will tell you before we wrap this up, yours is not this difficult. You only have about 7 different things to do to come up with credits and debits for. It's a whole lot less difficult for your test. I'm showing you the absolute worst it could ever look. Yours is not going to look like this. I'll kind of give you an example of what yours is more likely to look like here in a little bit, but yours is going to be so much easier. But it's still, you got to do some math on it. So let's keep going here, just so you can see how this thing plays out. And let me erase some of this stuff so I don't screw myself up here. Just did real property taxes. loan escrow account deposits required by lender. This is where I told you the lender says, give us some money to open this escrow account for you. And so they want 5 months of real property taxes. So we found your annual tax bill. It's right up here. I wrote it down for a reason. $940.34. Divide that by 12 to figure out how much that is each month, which is $78.36. And they want 5 months worth. So multiply it by 5. So that is $391.81 for, we'll call this tax escrows. And then they want, my calculator around here, 3 months of homeowner's insurance. Well, your homeowner's insurance was right here. So $350 divided by 12 times 3 months. $87.50. Call that homeowners insurance escrows. Items paid outside of closing. Folks, things paid outside of closing are not going to change your numbers. Do not plug them in here, okay? Paid outside of closing means it's already been paid. So I can ignore this paid outside of closing. It's not going to change my math. Miscellaneous expenses listed below are to be charged. Closing attorney fees, that is a buyer debit. Okay, when we say attorney fees, that is for the title search and title work and the lender stuff. So that's a, not there, buyer debit. So I'll say $400 AF attorney fees. Title insurance premium, that is going to be a buyer debit. Title insurance. Survey, buyer debit. Just put survey. Termite inspection, folks, sometimes that's referred to as a WDIR. Stands for wood destroying insect report. That is also a buyer debit. Just put pest. Recording fees, the deed and the deed of trust, those are buyer recording fees because you're recording the new deed in their name and the deed of trust to secure their loan. So I can just combine them. I'll just put $58 for recording fees. Excise tax is the seller, so I don't need to do anything here. And now, folks, as much as that was just tedious, painful, and everything, you just total them up. So if we look at the total credits, you've got 150 plus 1,500 plus 78,750 plus 422.82 for total credits of 80,822.82. Then you look at the debits. This is the hard part. This is just a bunch of crap. 87,500 plus 787.50 plus 1575 plus 332.50 plus 350 plus 391.81 plus 87.50 plus 400 plus 175 plus 195 plus 55 plus 58. I'm not redoing anything yet. Hang tight because I don't want to mess this up. Total debits, $91,907.31. Subtract out the credits of $80,822.82. And that's the answer, folks. What is the cash to close? Cash to close, $11,084.49. That is how much the buyer still needs to bring in certified funds to closing to be able to buy this property. TP was tax prorations. So we calculated the seller's portion of the taxes, and so we debited that seller's portion, which is January 1 through June 12th from the seller debit, buyer credit. So that's why we gave it to him as a buyer credit right there. Bree, what did you ask about? The formula for the homeowner's insurance line item?
Yeah, I definitely didn't do that.
Hold on. The escrows?
Yeah.
Yeah. So homeowner's insurance, and let me write down this number just so when I clear out the calculator, 11,084.49. And we'll call that cash to close. That'd be your answer. What it states is they want 3 months of homeowner's insurance premium. Well, your annual homeowner's insurance is $350. And so they want you to put 3 months worth in an escrow account. So you just take your $350, divide it by the number of months in the year, 12, to figure out how much it would be a month. And they want 3 months. So multiply that by 3.
Okay. So are we adding an extra line because then we have the 5 months of real property taxes? Or I don't know. I'll look at it again.
Here's the thing. You have to understand, taxes and insurance are going to end up on here twice. Once to deal with this year, and another time to deal with escrows for upcoming years. Remember the escrow account. The bank says, we want to open an account for you to store money for you to pay your taxes and insurance next year. That's what the escrows are. So it's a different line item than the taxes and the homeowner's insurance that we already did. It's give us some of your money to open an account in your name, and then each month when you make that pity payment, we'll take the T&I and add it to that account.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That makes everything
clear. Okay. And as I said, folks, just one question. Yours is not going to look like this in any way, shape, and form. Yours will have about 6 or 7 things that you will have to identify as credits and debits. And you may even see stuff that's generic like $3,000 another buyer closing costs or something like that. And so you would just have to find a home for these things. Is it a credit? Is it a debit? Is it the buyer? Is it the seller? And answer the question. Let me see if I can give you an example of what yours might actually look like. One thing that you're definitely going to have to do, folks, is just some of the prorations in and of themselves. Like, if I was to say something along the lines of, Janet said, yeah, it's still going to be multiple choice. So you're still going to have 4 options of, what would be the cash to close for the buyer. This is more like what yours would look like. It's not all that information, but there is enough to start breaking it apart. So $2,000 earnest money, $50 in due diligence, purchase price, loan to value ratio, origination fees, interim interest. Yours is much smaller. You're going to have like I said, 6 or 7 things to calculate and find a home for. But yours would look more like this. I will let you try one, but one of these has something in there that's going to throw you for a loop, so I'll look at it. Y'all go take a break. So, while you're on break, I looked through this one because I was remembering there was something that could throw you for a loop. And so I'm going to let you do this one. I want you to try to tackle it just to see how you're feeling. But I will give you a word of caution. The buyer will obtain a $10,000 purchase money mortgage. We just talked about those in the financing section. That is seller financing. And I told you, purchase money mortgages could be used to finance the entire property, or they could just be used to finance some portion of a down payment as long as the lender approved it. And so what's happening here is basically the seller provided $10,000 to the buyer towards purchasing the house. And so it would be a seller debit, buyer credit. And then of course the buyers are going to make payments to them just like they would the bank to pay off that purchase money mortgage. And so because this worksheet is only asking about the buyer, just put the purchase money mortgage in as a buyer credit. That's all you have to do for the sake of this one. Everything else you should be able to tackle based on what I just showed you. So work through it, take a few minutes, see what you can come up with, because you do have one of these on your test for me. And it looks kind of, like I said, similar to this one. Not the one I did, but 6 or 7 things that you have to work through and come up with a number. So, just a couple things while you're working on this. Number one, if you have questions, ask me. Number two, if you're just staring at it and making faces to make me think you're doing it, please let me know, because I'll just start reviewing it with you. Like, I don't want to sit here and be like, I'll give you more time. You're like, I wasn't actually doing it. I just made it look like I was doing it, right? Some of you, I feel like you're just looking at the screen and just trying to act frustrated, so then it looks like you're doing. Oh, just carry the 2, divide by the hypotenuse of pi. I gotta think about thawing the turkey. Hopefully he doesn't ask me for any actual answer. So Jack says, got a nice collection of numbers. Yeah, unfortunately, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, as they say. I don't know. But at least it's multiple choice. So you got a 25% chance of getting it right, even with a jumbled number.
When it asks when it says the balance of the purchase price will be paid in cash at settlement, is that saying that the buyer will pay the money purchase? The purchase money mortgage, or what is that?
Where are you talking about?
It says the balance of the purchase price will be paid in cash at settlement.
Yeah, that's just a generic statement stating that everything else that they have to pay is going to be part of their closing costs. You don't need to do anything with that number. Just know that when you find the cash to close, that number is included in it. Here's the easiest thing. Ignore that line. Because you have to understand, one of the biggest things that is part of the cash to close is the down payment. Because, in this example, they're getting 85% mortgage loan-to-value ratio. That means they're bringing 15% down payment, and that's going to automatically manifest when you calculate all the other numbers. It'll be part of. So that's what it's talking about, the 15% down payment, but you don't need to add it in separately, because it will automatically show up when you take the difference between what the purchase price is and what the loan amount is between those credits and debits, right? Yeah, no worries, folks. Got some numbers with 0 chance of being right. Let's just work it out together. I gave you enough time to kind of flounder around with it. Let me show you what it looks like. Hopefully it'll make you feel better. I did go over these, I think, with that previous class too, in the same place. So if you go and look at the recording, it shows me going over these exact same ones again. So remember, once again, understand what the question's asking. What is the net amount owed by the buyer if settlement is scheduled for May 25th? Now, this one, the information is not, super neat and clean. It's kind of jumbled around, so you got to keep it straight. But what we are focusing on is, yet again, the buyer. And so, buyer credits and debits. And I'm just going to go through the paragraph because I find it easier as opposed to jumping around, but I may jump around if I see fit. Buyer made a $2,000 earnest money deposit. Okay, well, that is a single entry buyer credit. $2,000 earnest money. With $50 due diligence fee, that'd be a seller debit buyer credit, but we're only worried about the buyer, so due diligence, $50. Contracted to purchase home for $120,000. That is a purchase price for the buyer. That purchase price is a buyer debit. Obtain an 85% loan-to-value ratio loan. So you take your $120,000, multiply it by 85%, which gives you a loan amount of $102,000. That is a buyer credit, right? The bank's giving you that money at closing. Yes, you'll pay it back later. So loan amount. 5% interest, pay the lender 1% origination fee along with interest. So your 1% origination fee, take this loan amount, multiply by 1%. That'd be 1,020 buyer debit for loan origination. And then the interim interest, probably one of those ones that's throwing you off. Go back to your loan amount of 102,000, multiply it by your annual interest rate of 5%. That gives you annual interest divided by 360 to figure out your per diem or daily interest. That'd be $14.17 a day. And you need to figure out how many days of interim interest. Folks, it's closing May 25th. Interim interest is just in the month that it's closing in. 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th. 6 days. You've got to include the date of closing. The banks say, we lent you money today. Start paying interest today. Leprosy. So 6 days times your $14.17 a day would be interim interest of $85.02. That is a debit. It's a loan cost, II, interim interest. And we keep going here. Origination fee, interim interest. Buyer will obtain $10,000 purchase money mortgage. I told you, for the sake of this, just put it as a buyer credit. It's a loan that the seller gave the buyer. They will pay it back just like the loan that the bank is giving them. So we'll call that purchase money mortgage. Lender will require 4 months of real property taxes to be deposited in escrow at settlement. Your taxes are here. Take your $1,350 divided by 12 to give you your monthly, and they want 4 months. So times 4. So that would be $450 buyer debit for tax escrows. And I think that's the only escrow. 4 months. Property taxes, balance of the purchase price. Ignore that. That's just stating that you're going to pay out the balance. Real property taxes estimated. The buyer has additional settlement costs of $775. So we're just going to put that as a debit. The one thing that probably will have screwed all of you up, because it didn't explicitly tell you what to do, which is kind of unfair, but this is, we'll just call this closing cost, is handling the rest of the taxes. That is not explicitly named in here. And so, folks, you've got to handle the taxes between the buyer and the seller. You got to make life fair, because if it's closing before September 1, that means that the buyer will be paying the full tax bill later in the year. And so we're going to debit the seller, credit the buyer. It's going to be January 1 through May 25th, the seller's responsible for. So January, February, March, April, and then 25 days in May. Take your annual tax bill of $1,350 divided by 360 days to get your per diem for taxes, which is $375 a day. And then it's going to be 30 days times 4 for January, February, March, April, plus 25 days for May. 145 days the seller's responsible for times your $375 a day. So this would be a seller debit of $543.75, buyer credit. We're only looking at the buyer, so we're going to give the buyer a credit of $543.75 for tax prorations. Assuming I didn't miss anything, now you just total it all up. Credits, $2,000 plus $50 plus $102,000 plus $10,000 plus $543.75 for total credits of $114,593.75. And then debits, $120,000 plus $1,020 plus $85.02 plus 450 plus 775. Total credits of 122,330.02. Subtract out your debits of 114,593.75. Cash to close 7,736.27. And bridge, apparently you cut yourself a little bit short. Yeah, you got it right. And you thought you didn't. I make it look easy, don't I? If you just picked a random number, then you better go buy a lottery ticket tonight, Bridge. Let's just be completely honest about that. Folks, it's one question. You have one like this on the test, very similar, about the same amount of line items. You know, it's pretty easy to practice it, but we're not going to spend any more time on it because it is just one question. At the end of the day...
Can you show me one more time for the interim interest? I don't know whether I got different number. Just interim interest.
Yeah, just the interim interest.
How you doing?
Yeah. The interim interest is your loan amount. Let me bring that back. Which is $102,000 because they can't charge you interest on money you didn't borrow. So your $102,000 loan amount times your interest rate of 5%.
Oh, okay, 5. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's your annual interest rate, but then we got to divide it by 360 days in our 360-day year, which gave us the $1,417 a day that you'd owe the bank in interest. And then how many days did you owe interest for? May 25th, because that's the day they lent you money. So the 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 6 days. So then it was 6 days times your $1,417 a day.
Oh, okay. But the loan is going to be start June, from July 1st, right?
May, June, yeah. July 1st will be your first payment, and that'll pay for all of June's interest. So the only interest they need is the rest of May. May 25th through May 30th.
Okay, how you know? Because we're not supposed to pay June also, no?
You're not supposed to do what?
We're not supposed to pay June interest.
No, remember, when you make July's payment, you're paying June's interest. That's what I mean when we're saying we're paying in arrears. When you close on May 25th, your first payment is going to be July 1st. And when you make July 1st payment, you paid for all of June's interest. And when you make August payment, you're paying for July, and you make, September, so on and so forth. The only interest that is not going to get paid in your amortization schedule is the 6 days in May, because there's really no place for the banks to get that. That's why they make you prepay it at closing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Folks, that's the closing a transaction in a nutshell, right? It's just understanding these closing disclosures, understanding these credits and debits, and that's what these next couple slides are, but I already showed you where to find this. So if they're recording the new deed and the deed of trust, that's a buyer recordation fee. But there are some times we're recording things for the seller for title defects. That'd be seller recordation fees. Excise tax defaults to the seller. Of course, title expenses default to the buyer. Word of caution on the test, folks. Remember, with excise tax, as it defaults to the seller, number one, always do what the math question tells you to do. Don't ever think you're smarter than the math question. Could you have a problem where it says the buyer's paying the excise taxes? It's possible. Could you have a problem where it says charge the buyer the day of closing? It's possible, right? So just be very careful. The other thing is excise tax is the only time on the entire course when rounding really does matter. Because remember, you cannot charge change on excise tax. So if there's so much as a penny, you've got to round up to the next dollar. Title expenses, buyer debit, even for the lender, because it's their loan. All the loan fees, right? The loan origination, the discount points, interim interest, all loan fees, buyer debits. Of course, insurance, taxes, like the escrows, buyer debit. Of course, when we're dealing with, the prepaid year of insurance, that's a buyer debit. Then, of course, the actual taxes for the year, typically dealing with buyer and seller there. Of course, appraisal fee, borrower debit, survey, buyer debit, due diligence fee, buyer credit, seller debit. And I will tell you, those are the kind of the biggest ones that you need to know. So I'm going to have you say it to me one more time, folks. How does earnest money show up on the closing disclosure? Yeah, single entry buyer credit. How does due diligence fee show up on the closing disclosure? Yeah, buyer credit, seller debit. Remember, you've got to paint the whole picture. You can't just say credit. You can't just say debit. You can't just say buyer. You got to paint the whole picture because that's how it will look on the test. For example, folks, let me just show you that math packet once again really quick. If you look, and we've already done some of this math early on in the course, but if you just look at some of the proration math, must be the other way. These are what the answer choices are going to look like. They're always going to say credits, debits, and you will see that you've got the exact same number, so you could get the number right, but if you don't know who it's a debit to and who it's a credit to, you can get the question wrong. This is how these answer choices are kind of mapped out a little bit. The other thing to remember too, that entire worksheet is based off the 360-day year, but I told you they could throw the 365-day actual calendar year at you. If that was the case, instead of taking the annual amount and dividing by 360, you divide it by 365. And when you were counting the days that somebody was responsible for, you'd have to use real calendar months. And I told you, easiest way, put your hands together like this. Every place there's a knuckle is 31. Every place there's a divot is 30, except for February, which is 28. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, right? Knuckle to knuckle. Those are your 31, 31, so on and so forth. How about this question? True or false? Seller's broker would be responsible for verifying the accuracy of home inspection and appraisal charges on the closing disclosure. Why is it false? Those are buyer costs. There you go. That's not their person. So you are only responsible for verifying things that you are aware of and your person's stuff. Obviously, the seller's broker would not be responsible for confirming appraisal fees and or inspection costs or anything like that. I'm not going to ask you this again. I've already told you this. Due diligence and earnest money. Let me give you just kind of a simplistic math question. I say simplistic. It's just a one-piece math question because it will be on your test and it is part of that bigger math question. Folks, take a look at this one and just calculate the interim interest. That's all I want you to calculate. Just practice the interim interest really quick. And I just showed you in Synthalast how we do that. So, compute the interim interest due to the lender for a March 27th closing. Sales price is $260,000, 80% loan to value ratio, and 4.5% interest rate. Multi-step math problem because you cannot charge interest on things that you didn't borrow. So first take your sales price of $260, multiply by your 80% loan to value ratio to give you a loan amount of $208,000. Then you take your loan amount and multiply it by your annual interest rate of 4.5% to give you annual interest of $9,360. Divided by 360 would be $26 a day. And you are closing on March 27th, so you're going to be charged interest for the 27th, 28th, 29th, and the 30th. 4 days. So 4 days times your $26 a day, $104 buyer debit.